In 1937, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service ordered the Mitsubishi Corporation to create a new bomber. They demanded it to have a combat radius of at least 2,000 kilometers and a cruising speed of 450 kilometers per hour. It also had to carry a torpedo on internal suspension, so the bomb hatch must have been very long. Plus, it had to be speedy enough to successfully escape fighter jets. As for the range, you won't believe it. They wanted it to be long enough for the bomber to serve as a front line and strategic one at the same time. Aircraft designer Kiro Honjo objected that a strategic bomber is better to have 4 engines, like the American B-17. But the fleet leadership rejected this thought in quite a sharp manner. Build a twin-engine bomber. Achieve the required parameters, at any cost. It was impossible to prove anything to the command, so Honjo and his engineers started getting the demanded numbers simply by sacrificing everything else. You wanted range? Okay. We'll put some integral fuel tanks of sufficient capacity inside the wing. And the fact that they aren't self-sealing and will catch fire after you so much as sneeze at them, well, there wasn't a word about that in the brief. Speed? What speed? Honjo barely convinced the military to allow him to put more powerful engines inside this machine. Fighters were becoming speedier by the minute, and the bomber surely could flee from a leisurely biplane, but it could never break away from a new wave fighter. Life seemed to mock the leadership of the Imperial Navy, tenderly indulging their misconceptions for the time being. The first G4M1s were very successfully used in China, almost without losses, because they were accompanied by the latest Zeros that the Chinese I-16s tried not to get involved with. On the very first day of the Pacific War, the Bettys, as they were called by the military, successfully bombed the Clark Field airfield in the Philippines, destroying dozens of American fighters and bombers at once. But they were actually extremely lucky that day. The Japanese arrived just at the moment when the Americans were refueling on the ground, half an hour earlier or later, and the valiant air samurais wouldn't stand a chance. In addition, it was the Betty who was lucky enough to sink the British HMS Prince of Wales battleship, along with the HMS Repulse battle cruiser. The ships were really doomed. They had been engaged in a long, exhausting battle, used up all their ammunition, and had no recon intel to rely on. Truth be told, anything could have sunk them. But the leadership saw a pattern where there was a series of coincidences and felt very enthusiastic about the latest bomber. They required it to be built in as large quantities as possible. And then the reckoning came. As soon as a Betty would encounter the slightest organized resistance, it would burn. Not just burn, but explode on its own gas vapors. The American pilots even started calling it the Flying Lighter, and their combat instructions advised them not to attack these bombers at close range, otherwise there was a risk of being hit by its explosion. But despite everything, Admiral Yamamoto loved the G4M and enjoyed flying it, until one day he met a squadron of Lightnings. The high-speed bomber failed to break away from them, and the Imperial Navy Air Service finally started to understand that Kiro Honjo wasn't just talking about 4 engines for no reason. It was the summer of 1943, and there were only prototypes of any Japanese 4-engine bombers existing. At the same time, in the USA, the mass production of the B-29 was already unfolding in full swing.